Hello and welcome to BharatShakti. We'll be talking once again about Operation Sindoor. We have covered Operation Sindoor in fair amount of detail, but now we will start looking at ahead of Operation Sindoor, how do we prepare ourselves for a problem which might erupt any time. Despite all our warnings to Pakistan, it's possible for us to visualize that Pakistan will not be giving up the kind of approach that it has displayed so far. So primarily in this episode, we'll be focused on what should the Indian Armed Forces do to ensure that our conventional deterrence is such that we stop Pakistan in its tracks from creating any more havoc, at least in Jammu and Kashmir. To go through the whole process, I have with me an old friend, Lt Gen Philip Campose. Welcome, General. Welcome to BharatShakti.
Thank you, Brigadier Chatterji, for having me on your show.
Well, thank you. And we can, of course, say that we are co-mates from the Indian military days. General Campose has been the Army Commander of Western Command and thereafter the Vice Chief of Army Staff. Obviously, a man who's had enough exposure to be drawing out the map that we should adopt for developing our forces for tomorrow's battle. Welcome to BharatShakti once again. And if I can just launch myself into the first question that I have in mind. See, this was a different kind of a conflict. This was short, this was to an extent intense, you can say. And there was a shift towards technology. Now, we committed our resources, but we did not really go into the process of general mobilization or putting larger land forces into the battle area. So, how do you see this conflict really?
To understand what has happened in Operation Sindoor, we have to go a little back in history to see what has happened in similar situations in earlier times.
Okay.
We all know about the attack on the parliament and how we mobilized. At the end of that entire episode of Operation Parakram, we came up with this proactive strategy. It had other names, but we all know about a proactive strategy, which was essentially to strike first and mobilize later. Because the process of mobilizing first to strike ended up in a lot of delay and sort of did not allow you to go at the time and place that you wanted. So then you had this proactive strategy going on for some time, till 2008. And 2008, we have the Mumbai terror attack. And in the Mumbai terror attack, we wanted to use the proactive strategy. But then it was felt it was too disproportionate that a terror strike has happened, fine, and now you want to, put the entire system and
force.
start a war across 3 or 4 domains. That somehow, I don't know the reasons, but possibly it could also be that the military authorities had not shared enough with the political authorities earlier. So when it happened, it was not acceptable. And then after this government, then there was this period of trying to use covert strikes, that when things happened on the line of control, you resorted to covert strikes in some sort of proportionate manner, which sometimes worked, sometimes didn't work, but nobody came to know outside. Then after this government came into place, a new sort of doctrine started working. And this started working from 2015 itself, when there was this strike on a insurgent camp, northeast insurgent camp across the border in Myanmar. So there was a raid launched in response to an ambush of a military logistics column, in which I think 17 or 18 people had died. So for the first time, a doctrine of overt, proportionate, punitive response started. So you saw the same thing in Uri, surgical strike, and then you saw it again in Balakot in 2019 in response to Pulwama. So what we are looking at now is a process or a doctrine which we have been following now, like I said, it's over 10 years. It should be overt, it should be proportionate, it should be punitive, and it should have the effect of dissuading the terrorist or whoever or their sponsors from doing it the next time. So in this new process, there is no mobilization involved so far. So it has worked, this entire process has worked, and it has somehow sort of, it has not, the de-escalation has taken place without any escalation really having taken place on the ground. So it's all worked so far.
Well, let's see how does it work later on. But you were talking about the doctrine. See, our new doctrine actually puts that bar a little lower in terms of our response. Right, that's one. But we also this time faced a threat which I would say was much more limited, much more both in size as also in terms of geography. But tomorrow we will have to face a threat which is China, which is terror, which is Pakistan. All three elements perhaps put together. I do not in fact see an opportunity at all of any one of them going alone actually if required. All three of them will go alone. It may be only terror could be practiced alone. Otherwise all three of them are together in some form or the other. So what do you have to say about this new doctrine, and how does the military really get itself positioned to be facing the kind of battle that they will be faced with that day?
So from what I have said just now, if you go further up, you will realize 2015, 2016, 2019 and now 2025. In each instance, there has been a escalation in the level of how we have retaliated. From a small raid to a bigger raid to an airstrike, and now we've had a combination of strikes and not restricted to a small area, but across, as you know, whatever happened right from Srinagar down to Bhuj. That's how
exactly
the other side activated their drones, etc. So what is happening is that this doctrine itself, there is some escalation written into it, because the other side is watching. So he is also preparing, and each time, like you said, one is the bar for retaliation is being lowered, but the scale of retaliation is increasing. So as a result of this, we are getting closer and closer to a stage when you will be responding by something akin to our proactive strategy or a full-fledged war. And when we talk in the context of full-fledged war, we again come down to issues like whether it would be a two-front war. Even this time, one of the lessons drawn was the involvement of China, though the Chinese would like to say that they had nothing to do with it. But their footprint was there in everything that happened, whether it was electronic warfare, whether it was satellite support, whether it was the equipment being used, the aircraft being used, the missiles being used, the anti-aircraft weapons being used. Everywhere there was a Chinese footprint at this level. So when you take it to the full-fledged war level or a limited war or the full-fledged war level, the involvement of China and in case of Pakistan, whatever happens on the regular front, there is also the irregular element. So that 2 automatically becomes a 2.5 front. So it's a possibility.
And there's a possibility the Chinese, by just deploying, by let's say tying down our divisions that are looking across that front, will not allow us to move our formations to the western front. That by itself will be a big denudation of force that we could have otherwise employed on the west.
Yeah, very possible. That in case there is a heightened level of conflict between India and Pakistan, technology-wise, equipment-wise, it's a given. China will support Pakistan. But how much he supports by the actions of troops on the ground, there will be restrictions he'll place on himself. And like you said, in most cases, he will restrict himself to movements on his side of the front where he will try and pin down your forces.
Let's go a little further. Let's go into another domain, General. I'm talking about the information domain. Now, as far as information operations are concerned, I feel we have not exploited the domain fully in this particular case of Sindoor. Of course, there was not much time to roll it out for us, but there was time between the date on which the attack took place on the tourists and we launched Operation Sindoor. There was time to build up, and there's time to take it further. In fact, what's peculiar, or I would say what is a rather surprise, is not very many countries also have come out openly supporting us with the same kind of force that we expected perhaps. Also, the general public in these countries, I would say you call it public diplomacy practices, have not been so large as to form an opinion in people that we were really justified in doing this. How do you see utilizing this domain of information a little better so that we could perhaps generate more support for our actions globally?
I agree with you. One of the major lessons that has come out of this entire episode, starting from the terror strikes of 22nd till the so-called ceasefire of the 10th, is the way the world saw us. And so when you talk about the way the world sees us, or the way the people outside see us, you have to look at it in two contexts. One is diplomacy and the other is media. And there is a sense among Indians, by watching what was happening in the international news and what was happening internationally in world bodies like the United Nations or the IMF, that the international community did not appear to be as sympathetic to our point of view as we would have wished them to be, considering that we had had a major terror strike in which 26 innocents had been gunned down. We would have thought that the entire world would be with us. But we found it quite shocking through this entire process that the world was not so forthcoming. This is one issue. The second is the issue of the media. Whether the media was able to project our point of view in a manner that the world would see it in the way that we wanted them to. That was the other part where we felt that the TV media, which in India, which forms a very large dominant part of our media, was, rather than playing it at international standards or norms, was playing it in a very crass manner aimed at the domestic audience. They were not interested in sort of what are the world standards of media or whatever. So what happened was, the 8th of May is a very important day, I feel, which people need to take note of. The people at the political level, diplomatic level, military level need to take note of how do we handle a thing like this. You can't do what we did on the 8th, that somewhere our media got an idea that we could take over, attack Pakistan, take over their cities. So each media house started taking over one city. By morning, he has captured, started knocking down aircraft, started capturing pilots. So all this was going on. Everybody thought it was par for the course, that this is how information war is fought.
No, but let me interject for a second. This is playing to the regional media. I agree with you, they have played the game not so responsibly. But that is more for the Indian audience and for the Indian diaspora abroad. It doesn't make public opinion otherwise in New York or Washington, let's say. What I think is important also is this arteries of media communication, PTI, UNI, they should have fed enough perhaps to really project our story from American publications in New York or Washington or London for that matter, anywhere. What do you say to that?
See, I heard I started getting calls on 7th morning, and every time I tried to explain our point of view, and the questions were always about what happened, and I would tell them this is what happened, and the answer meant how many planes, how many aircraft of ours went down. And this is Indian friends or family asking me. I of course said I don't know how many aircraft have gone down, but this is what actually happened. So this story continued right till the end. And one of those people surmised to me that he said, I've been watching the international media over the last 4 or 5 days. And he says, in any discussion, when you have got somebody speaking up for India and somebody speaking up for Pakistan, the person speaking up for Pakistan appeared to be more clear and sort of clear in what he was expressing, and to that extent he appeared more authentic as compared to the one who was giving the Indian point of view. And what was more surprising, what I was pointed out to me, and I have not really gone into it, but this is people who have analyzed it telling me, that the people who were representing the Pakistani point of view on these media channels were Americans of Pakistani origin, whether they were journalists or experts or whoever. But he said the person who was giving the Indian point of view in their sort of CNN or BBC or any of those other channels, he said the other guy was not an Indian, not an American of Indian origin. He would be an American or whoever, whose knowledge about what was actually happening was very shallow. And moment they were questioned, they went back into 1947 partition, and then they tried to hyphenate India and Pakistan. So that is where somewhere I think our information system needs to take a very careful look. We have got a model, we have seen what has happened. Study this, test case sort of, do a case study, go into the details of it, find out what went wrong and be prepared for it better the next time. But definitely there was a shortfall this time.
You know, I once in a while lectured in Indian Institute of Mass Communications, and this Indian Information Services officers, I feel their employment needs to be there also in our embassies, etc. To create the kind of network there in those countries. You can't just leave every responsibility to one particular man. This gentleman and also maybe the defense attaché, because he has a job in information operations as such. They have to be there in the embassy in at least those countries which matter more to you, accredited with some more countries that they can take on the load of, and then develop this kind of a network, identify people. It's only then when you develop this network can you fight it on a particular day, and that day might come without too much of notice.
And it varies from country to country. You know, the system of how sort of impressions are made, it varies from country to country. A country like the United States, the system of lobbying, hiring lobbyists, and finally you may be winning or losing because you got a better lobbying firm whom you've hired vis-a-vis the other guy. So all these, I think, there are peculiarities in the Western world and other parts of the world. We need to study this and be above it.
Right. Let's go a little further, Jen. We'll talk about the budget. You've been a man who's been handling the budget as the Vice Chief quite a bit. So tell us, well, there's so many responsibilities which we talked about, which this new doctrine puts on the armed forces, etc. Now, to discharge all these responsibilities, you need a certain degree of preparedness. And at the end of the day, it's hard money that you require really. So what do you talk about? What is your take on the budget? How do we increase it? And let's not go step by step. Perhaps we need a huge, large leap. What do you have to say?
See, I agree with you that for a very long time, we have been talking about shortfalls in capability. Okay, we have been talking about it for a very long time. And one of the ways we always felt that this shortfall could be made up was by hiking up the budget. And as a percentage of GDP, we've always had these benchmarks that it should be above 2 and then 2.5 and 3. Of course, these benchmark, the parameters also change, because at one time pensions were not part of the defense budget. So suddenly when somebody added the pensions to it, then the whole percentage thing got skewed again. But suffice to say, there is a reason, a very justified, serious reason for ensuring that the budget has to be increased to increase the capability of the forces. These services have an entire system in place in which they analyze, starting with what is going to be the threat on a future perspective, 15-year perspective say, and then they work as to what is the equipment, what is the organization which we should have 15 years down the line, and then break it into a 5-year package or a 2-year package or a 1-year package. So there is a system in place. But then what happens is we have never been able to meet the budget for meeting this organized way of expenditure, in which each service requests for a certain amount of budget for the year, and invariably every year he doesn't get what he wants. So there is a shortfall building up. But what has happened in the meanwhile is that because there is a certain desperation to get certain important things, especially after, say, Balakot, February 2019, after Balakot, people saw it as one sort of case study on which we must work on a certain response. So we have worked on it, we were prepared for it. So in Sindoor, we were prepared to deal with a Balakot-like situation and come out on top, which we have done. Okay.
Achieved.
So that is done. That is because we worked with Balakot as our as the template.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when we raise the level and take it closer to war, a full-fledged war, we have not mobilized this time, so it's not even a limited war. So you go to a limited war or you go to a full-fledged war, the requirements are much more. Then capability in terms of meeting your shortfalls, in terms of modernization, all your old equipment you cannot be holding for 40 years or 50-year-old equipment. You have to be having new equipment. Take artillery guns, take tanks, ICVs, whatever. There is air defense. So there are lots of issues. So whereas we have met in the current situation, Operation Sindoor, we have done well. We had whatever was required. But when we raise the level and go for a limited war or for a full-fledged war, the type of capability, the quality of equipment that we'll need is going to be much, much higher and better. So we have to be prepared for that, and that means more budget. So by raising expectations that next time the level of conflict will be much higher, and lowering the bar by saying that we will not wait to go through these stages of escalation, we will hit you directly where it hurts most. Your preparedness has to be much higher, your equipment status has to be much higher, your logistics in terms of armament, ammunition, everything to back you up has to be much higher. So this has to be understood, that whereas we have done well in Sindoor, we've come out with flying colors, we've come out victors. Now, if we want to keep up the momentum and be prepared for the eventualities as it happens in the future, we will have to prepare accordingly.
Right, General. Good. I agree with you. We've come out with flying colors, etc. In the bargain, General, if I can say, just as an aside, you've also produced a field marshal on the other side. So, Asif Munir becomes a field marshal. What do you expect him to do next, and how do you,
See, when you look at General, I'll still call him General before I get to the next step. When you see General Asim Munir, he has been fully responsible for this entire whatever's happened. Starting from the strike by terrorists on those innocent tourists in Pahalgam. If you have to hold one man responsible for that terror strike, it's Asim Munir. Okay. And by doing so, he took his country into a situation where they got a real pasting on the morning of 10th of May. If on the morning of 10th of May, the country reached a situation that literally they raised their hands and they were looking for a lifesaver, which they got in terms of American intervention in the daytime to sort of come in and then contact the Indians on their behalf to seek a ceasefire, they have been saved by the bell. So Asim Munir has not done something great. You may call it a victory or whatever. Now that you can call it anything, okay? But it's a lie. Let's be very, very clear, it's a lie. Why has he been made a field marshal? My understanding is he has been made a field marshal because the political authority has learned their lessons from 1999 Kargil and what happened thereafter with General Musharraf. So they have, the political authority in Pakistan have realized that when you've got a injured tiger, like Musharraf was after being defeated in Kargil, that you creating a situation getting ready for a coup. So to that extent, I think this is a very defensive measure. Of course, he may have coerced them like any military general in Pakistan can. Coerce the system, and he's definitely what I call a rogue general. If he has sort of coerced the system, that is one part of it. And the second is the system is looking at what can happen there next.
Everybody learns from history. So
and they have protected themselves thinking of what happened after 1999, where again the Americans had intervened and pulled back Musharraf, and so there was a tussle at the political versus military level as to who was responsible for what went wrong, and at the end of it you had General Musharraf taking over. So I think there is some sort of lessons learned. The political authority is more or less the same. They are the ones who learned the lessons. So I think they have enough experience and they have played their card. It's a very, I would say, a smart thing to do for them in the circumstances by the political authority. That's what I would give it. I don't see any field marshal like capabilities which have caused the government of Pakistan to give him this rank.
Right. Thank you, General. Thanks a lot for sparing your time for BharatShakti.
Thank you very much.
We'll look forward to more such discussions later, some other day. Thank you, viewers. Thanks a lot for logging into BharatShakti. Do log in like this. We are covering the operation very closely and you will find interesting facts, interesting stories coming your way. Thank you.